1917 was an especially tumultuous year in Russia. In a previous video, I briefly talked about the February Revolution, which took place in March, along with the general situation in the following months. It is time to detail the Second Revolution, which led to the establishment of the first communist government and the Russian Civil War. The latter is particularly interesting to me, so I will definitely dedicate a separate episode to that period as well. But now, let's take a look at the second half of 1917. The first provisional government was declared back on the 16th of March in the Gregorian calendar. It comprised mainly of liberal cadets, Octobrists, and progressists, along with a few moderate socialist members, socialist revolutionaries, and Mensheviks. The latter group came from the Petrograd Soviet, which was supposed to represent the capital's workers and soldiers. In this period of dual power, the Soviet was led by Menshevik executive chairmen like Nikolai Chkeidze and Alexander Kerensky, who promised peace and bread, meeting popular demands, something that the government did not do. On the far left, the Bolsheviks had other ideas. Once Lenin returned to Russia with German assistance, he published his April thesis, in which he called for a seizure of power by the Soviets, workers' councils. This forced the other Bolsheviks to reject cooperation with the provisional government, but also led to the July Days, a failed attempt to overthrow the government, which Lenin refused to support. By that time, the Kerensky offensive had failed, several cadet ministers walked out of the coalition government, and even Prime Minister Lvov resigned. From War Minister, Kerensky became the new Prime Minister, but his SR and Menshevik government continued the war and failed to handle the food crisis or initiate land reform, which the masses desired. Russia was still a predominantly agricultural society, and mass strikes and peasant uprisings became very common. The adoption of freedom of speech, equality before the law, and the right to form unions did not ease tensions. Bolshevik leaders, including Lenin, were forced to go underground, but the situation reversed in early September when Commander-in-Chief General Kornilov, who had been appointed by Kerensky himself, marched on Petrograd to restore order and eliminate the Soviet. It's possible that Kerensky had initiated this action, but he also feared that the army would establish a military dictatorship, so he turned to the Soviet to keep Kornilov's troops out of the city. The Bolsheviks were given arms and ammunition, but Kornilov never entered Petrograd as Bolshevik railway workers hindered his progress and most of his soldiers deserted. Lenin's party gained public support. Several Soviets in Moscow, Minsk, Kiev, and other cities adopted their vision, while the government fell apart. Kerensky created a new governing body, the Directorate, by decree, before the third provisional government could be formed 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the old State Duma was dissolved, the monarchy was abolished, a republic was announced, and the plan was to have elections to establish a constituent assembly that would decide the future form of government. This was unacceptable to the right, while on the left, the split between moderate parties and the Bolsheviks became final, as only Lenin pushed for peace, and by late October he had decided that time had come for armed uprising. In early November, Kerensky accused the Bolsheviks of treason and announced the closure of several left-wing and right-wing newspapers. On the 6th of November, sporadic clashes broke out in the capital between Red Guards and forces loyal to the government. The Reds soon recaptured some printing houses, then seized control of the central telegraph and all lines of communication. On the following day, Bolshevik sailors arrived from Kronstadt, while Red forces systematically captured government buildings and other key points in the city. They already had control over railroads and almost all means of communication, so the government was unable to call in reinforcements. Kerensky managed to leave Petrograd in a borrowed vehicle, while Lenin immediately issued a proclamation to the people of Russia about the overthrow of the government, even before the final assault on the Winter Palace took place at night. By the early hours on the 8th of November, remaining government troops surrendered, members of the provisional government were arrested, and the Petrograd Soviet now fully controlled the city. This was just the first step, as Lenin wanted to have control over all Soviets in the country, not just in the capital. For this reason, the Second Congress of Soviets was convened, with less than 30% of all councils represented, but with a Bolshevik majority. The Congress still had sizable SR and Menshevik factions, but their delegates viewed recent actions as illegal and they soon walked out, only to be replaced with left SRs who allied themselves with the Bolsheviks. Together they had two-thirds majority, so Leon Trotsky, president of the Petrograd Soviet and Lenin's staunch ally, had no difficulty pushing through a decree that announced the transfer of state power from the provisional government to the deputies of the Congress. These deputies quickly elected a new Soviet government under the name Council of People's Commissars. This cabinet then passed two other decrees about immediate peace and land reform, fulfilling the original promises of the left. At this point, the Second Congress of Soviets acted as a parliament of sorts, while the Council of People's Commissars became the new government, but pending the approval of the Constituent Assembly, which was to be elected in mid-November after a 2-month delay. This date had been announced by the now defunct provisional government. To complicate matters even more, Kerensky found loyal troops in Pskov, with which he tried to retake the capital. After initial success, his attempt failed, and since he was unable to find further support, he chose exile in France. In Georgia, the future Stalin's homeland, Mensheviks seized power and declared independence, while in the Don region, the Don Cossacks also formed their own government. In Moscow, after 1 week of street fighting, the Bolsheviks gained power and took control of the city, but the countryside remained divided. This division was apparent in the results of the Constituent Assembly elections. There, the Socialist Revolutionaries got 40% of the votes, although by that time the party had split into two. The Bolsheviks received only 24%, while the other parties remained in single-digit territory. However, the Bolsheviks enjoyed greater support in major cities and in the army, and by December they added Kharkov, Sevastopol, Tula, Kishinev, Novorossiysk, and others to the list. In the meantime, they delayed the convocation of the Constituent Assembly until January 1918, and when it finally assembled and rejected Soviet decrees of peace and land reform, it was simply dissolved by the Congress of Soviets. Also in January, the new secret police, the Cheka, was established, helping to consolidate power in Bolshevik hands. The Soviet cabinet announced the nationalization of all private property and banks, the repudiation of all foreign debts, angering Russia's former Entente allies, an 8-hour workday, and an increase in wages, but also the expropriation of private bank accounts and all properties of the Orthodox Church, which wasn't very popular on the right. During the Third Congress of Soviets, some Menshevik and SR deputies expressed their dissatisfaction with Bolshevik decisions, but the suppression of rival parties and the seizure of all power were almost complete by that time. The Bolsheviks now controlled most of the country, although opposition forces started to emerge. In December, the Ukrainian Rada refused to let Red forces pass through its territory to reach the Don, after which clashes broke out and an independent Ukraine was announced, along with a Soviet Ukraine. Estonia also broke away, while in the south, a volunteer army was being assembled by General Alexeyev, the former Tsarist chief of staff. Sporadic fighting also broke out in the Urals, some parts of Siberia, and the Crimea, but that's a story for another day.